Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. We've got Premier League football to talk about. A match actually took place. Tottenham Hotspur against Manchester United. Of course, as you are well aware, it was different. It was strange. It was football, maybe not quite as we know it, but it was a football match. And in its purest form, on the actual pitch, it was pretty much a normal football game. I think it was just everything more around it that was very strange. I mean, just to kind of talk you through my experience of it, I had two journalists have been encouraged to drive at the moment rather than taking public transport. So I drove to the stadium, and which would have seemed quite alien for, well, certainly myself and fans as well. The entire South Plaza outside the back of the big kind of glass south side of the building was transformed into like a temporary car park. So we all parked up there. I don't know if you saw, I think I put it maybe on Twitter, possibly a photo of it. It looks very different. Obviously, we're used to fans congregating out there before they head into the stadium, but it was a car park. So we did that, parked there, had to go round, walk around the front of the building, and then rather than, I don't know if anyone's ever seen the media entrances normally downstairs, we had to go upstairs and temperature, like gun checks. Very strange moment where a journalist behind me had his temperature checked and it was 33, which obviously, if you know your temperatures, is incredibly low. So they had to wait for a minute and then do it again. I think it's clearly something to do with taking a temperature check outdoors with probably wind as well playing its part. And yeah, and then once we're in the building, everything was all social distance, of course. We were all wearing face masks, taken straight to our seats, and where we were all, more than 2 meters apart there as well. So it was very different. And I think, in terms of the match itself, I think I've kind of got used to now. My brain certainly has been tricked by watching it on telly with the crowd sounds. I think it's EA do it, which I feel like that's getting a bit better and better and better. The first couple of games I watched the other day were pretty out of sync. The noise was odd. It didn't quite fit what was happening. Unlike the Bundesliga, which I think has been really good, their crowd effects. Whereas the ones I've watched watched the one today and a couple yesterday, they seem to be starting to work it out. But what was strange for me is I'd kind of got used to that. So then suddenly sitting inside a very empty Tottenham Hotspur stadium, and obviously I was watching the game, and yeah, to begin with, it did feel a little bit like I'd got exclusive access to some kind of training game. But what I would say, I think maybe in the opening stages, there's perhaps a bit of a kind of trying to feel your way back into a match for the players. But I do believe that as a Premier League game, it pretty much was, well, we'll talk about whether actually performances, quality of the football and the tactics and attractiveness of the game itself, that's one thing. But in terms of an actual match itself, I think it was still pretty much a normal football game. And I think I've seen that on a few of them. I'm just watching some of the Newcastle-Sheffield United game. And I think the quality is still there, but don't get me wrong, not having the fans there is very strange. You guys make the difference. You really do. And I think, for me, all I kept thinking of was, apart from how quiet it was and how enormous the stadium looks when it's actually empty, they've got these big kind of awnings, like big kind of bits of material that are like, Can't Smile Without You, To Dare Is To Do, things like that all around it along the lower tier to try and kind of block out the fact, mainly for cameras, I think, that there are no fans there. But what I just kept thinking was, my God, that first match back when the fans are allowed back in is going to be so loud. I think so many people are going to just exhale kind of all of their frustration and everything in one almighty go. And what I did find was the stadium, because of the way we know it's built in this certain way for fans to be heard even louder and make this cauldron, and certainly Spurs players have said in the past, sometimes they can't actually hear themselves just talking to someone 6 foot away on the pitch. But it had a similar effect, but in terms of the players. So when I was listening, you can hear everything the players are saying. It's a bit weird. Even in the press box, you're kind of talking to each other in whispers, which is difficult when you're 2 meters apart as well. But you kind of know that if I talk too loudly, one of the players or Mourinho could even hear what I'm saying, especially if you were slaying someone or something. And so likewise was true. The amount of times Coco was the one that you just heard all the time. Obviously, Eric Lamella's nickname, you just heard that a lot because I think he was doing a lot of covering other people's roles, so they were all calling him over. Harry's ball, which was unfortunately for Spurs, was Harry Maguire, and he won pretty much every single thing in the air. Logic would suggest, why keep pumping the ball long to him then? And loads of stuff like that. I mean, if for anyone interested, Hugo Lloris and Eric Dier for me were the two big voices you heard a lot from the Spurs players. Very much the leaders of that team on Friday night. Really vocal, organising kind of people in the starting 11. So, I mean, let's talk about that starting 11. That seems a good point to actually get into the match itself. I was almost there with my predicted team. I think I was 2 out, which, you know, I suppose in the grand scheme of predicting a team isn't actually that close. But, I mean, Mourinho explained his reasons afterwards for it. I mean, obviously, if you've been living on the moon or something, you'll know that the back four was Aurier, Sanchez, Dier, Davies, and you had Sissoko and Winks. And then the three behind Kane were Son, Lamela and Bergwijn. Quite interestingly for me, Bergwijn and Son not in the positions I expected. You know, Mourinho made this big thing about how Bergwijn could come in and was maybe more naturally a left-sided player, which would allow Son to then head out onto the right, which he felt was his best role. But they actually kind of were inverted. They were playing the other way round. So that was interesting. I think when you look at it, I think on paper it was quite an attacking lineup. You know, certainly I heard pundits saying that, but actually in practice, because of the way Lamela was almost coming back into making it a three in the middle, it wasn't really that on paper. And what Mourinho said afterwards, his explanation for it was that he, and this is massively going to feed into the anti-football Mourinho narrative, but he said he deliberately picked this kind of team and used these tactics because he feels that United's weakness is when you actually ask them to play football. He said they're terrific at counter-attacking. He said, but actually forcing the issue he thinks they struggle with, which was something that was kind of labelled against Pochettino's sides, you know, a couple of years back, that on the counter-attack they were stunning, fast, physical teams, but actually when you gave them the ball and sat in banks of, you know, 2 big banks of 4 or 5, they couldn't get through. And that's kind of what he feels about United. And it's one of those things where you could look at it, I could look at it, and we could say, I personally don't like that. You know, I don't like the home team giving up advantage to the other team to try and play their football. Even understanding the logic of the tactics, I don't like it. It kind of is admitting that your team isn't strong enough to compete with the other team on a level footing. I know you haven't got the fans behind you, but still you are that home team. However, if I'm going to play devil's advocate, it almost worked. Other than a penalty, albeit I know a lot of people feel it's quite soft, it would have worked, but it didn't. Well, it depends how you look at it. You know, I suppose there were a lot of people, or quite a few people were telling me that United were going to run away with it in the match, and that didn't happen. Chances they had were quite limited, but on the flip side, so were Spurs. So, you know, I think the biggest, obviously, eye-catching kind of misses were Lucas Moura was not available. He picked up a knock in training. I think it was either a day or two before the game. Mourinho afterwards kind of hinted that he expected to have everyone fit for the West Ham game. So hopefully that means it's nothing serious for Lucas Moura. And obviously he didn't have Dele Alli either. But then he also left Lo Celso on the bench, which I think we had an inkling. I was saying that early in the week, and then Mourinho in the press conference beforehand was saying that he felt, I mean, to just explain it in case you missed it, before, I don't know if you kind of test your memory, if you remember there was a couple of games where essentially Lo Celso was playing right through to the end of the 90 minutes, was absolutely flogged. They couldn't take him off. He was limping around. I'm trying to remember the game before Burnley, I think it was, possibly. It might have even been Burnley. There was one where they just put him up front because he could barely move. He took a big whack. So essentially, that was the game where he injured himself. And then he's had this issue which hasn't been able to be fixed because during the lockdown, they weren't allowed to send physios around. He wasn't allowed to come in to get any treatment. So this problem has kind of just sat with him for a while, and he actually needed specialist kind of treatment on it. So they were only, in recent weeks when he's come back to the training ground, being able to fix it. It was a groin problem. Sorry, I should have specified that. So for him, he's slightly behind the others in terms of his fitness and sharpness. So that was why he didn't start. I think he probably would have in normal circumstances. But then what surprised me was, if you don't have Lo Celso, was that Ndombele didn't start. And the reason that surprised me is a couple of reasons. First off is, I mean, I've been saying these on these videos, I've been writing about it. Mourinho has been really impressed with what Ndombele has been doing in recent weeks. He's been really feels that the application, his attitude has really been good. And funnily enough, he actually confirmed that in the press conference on Thursday. He said, I feel like we're getting kind of a lot more out of him. And then for me, what's the reward for that? No minutes. Not only did he not start, but he didn't even bring him on. And we'll come on to that later. But I just don't. I think sometimes Mourinho, he's got this kind of tough love thing, which works with some players. But it'll be interesting to see how Ndombele kind of reacts to this. He could go one way. He could absolutely smash it in training in the next couple of days and quite possibly could start against West Ham. Or there's this feeling, certainly within Mourinho's camp, that the people around Ndombele are very quick to get the message back to France, let's say, that he's not happy. So it'll be interesting to see whether in the next couple of days, possibly time for the morning of the West Ham match, whether you see a Ndombele unhappy, Ndombele wants to leave stories popping up in French media. And if so, you kind of know where that's probably come from. But I really hope it's the former, and that, whether I agree with it or not, whether the tough love element works. And let's not forget, Celso did not convince Mourinho to begin with. He's admitted it. He said, I didn't really know where his place was in my team. And then bang, he's actually one of the most key, crucial players Spurs now have. They don't have another playmaker. So I did feel that not having an Ndombele and Lo Celso in there meant you didn't have someone holding possession. The ball was lost far too easily by Spurs. I get the sense of letting Man U play and trying to hit them on the counter, but they just gave the ball away too much. We're going to go through the team in a minute. I mean, let's start right at the back. Hugo Lloris, I thought had a really good game. Superb, actually. I thought really important early save from Rashford with his feet, and the save from Martial was absolutely world class. I put a bit on Twitter earlier because I just wanted to check if I was going mad or not. But in my ratings, I said something about how he pulled off these two fantastic saves. One especially I felt was wonderful. And I had some person on Twitter saying they were two basic routine saves. It just blew my mind because I've watched it and Spurs put out a video of it again. I've just watched from every angle how far away he is, the reflexes involved when you look at it in full speed, being able to also tip it over the bar. Phenomenal save. I don't think anyone can criticise. I think in terms of shot stopping, I think Lloris is up there with the absolute best in the world. His kicking is another thing, and I think his first kick of the night went out of play. But in terms of his actual shot stopping, I think he's phenomenal. And I think, I gave him man of the match for Spurs. Because I just think those two saves came at such crucial times, and the whole face of the game could have been completely different. Sent the wrong way with a penalty, but then penalties are a bit of a lottery. They are, unless you're one of these kind of specialist goalkeepers who maybe aren't the top goalkeepers in other fields, if you see what I mean, in other areas. So I thought he played well. And I want to talk about the centre-backs, because for me, it kind of worked. It did. And I've talked about this partnership before, because I always remember, I think it was 2 seasons ago, Eric Dier and Davinson Sanchez played against Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park, and they kept a clean sheet. And I remember that day thinking, actually, it's quite a nice pairing, because what Dier allows Sanchez to do, and also helps out with Tottenham, is I think Tottenham, especially with Vertonghen struggling this season, they've had real problems with that left-sided centre-back role. Any other fit other than Vertonghen has looked quite like a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. It just doesn't quite work. Alderweireld looks uncomfortable there. Sanchez looks uncomfortable there. Foyth hasn't even been tried there. I'm not even sure if Tanganga maybe played there, possibly in the Carabao Cup. Obviously, without Tanganga at the moment, he's got that stress fracture of his back. They're hoping to have him back before the end of the season, but we'll see on that one. But yeah, for me, Dier, he's so versatile that actually I kind of like the idea of him playing there. And he played there a couple of times before football shut down. And I felt the penalty incident aside, I thought Dier was superb. He really was. I felt, in hindsight, I think, or looking back, I think I was probably harsh with him on my ratings. I marked him down. He was heading towards an 8 or a 9, and I marked him down to a 6 purely because of the penalty incident. It's one of those where, yeah, of course it's soft. Absolutely is soft. But if you're going to get that beaten that easily, yeah, it was a skillful little move by Pogba, but if you're going to get beaten, you can't then swing around and stick your hands on the guy's back. We know what's going to happen with probably 75% of attacking players. They're going to go down like a deck of cards. And that just for me knocked it down. Probably, looking back, probably knocked him down maybe one or two too many. But I thought he was really, really good. And like I said, ally that with the leadership and the vocal side of his game, and I thought that really worked. And I thought Sanchez, obviously, with Dier, you're not going to get pace. So Sanchez provided that. He was a bit wobbly early on. He had that dodgy header that went to Rashford at the back post. And I think he had another moment where he deflected across actually towards goal, and Lloris had to bail him out there as well. But I do think after that, he grew into the game and he made this terrific surge back to tackle, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Rashford. Yes, Rashford, second half. And actually, that's made me forget Dier. I think he did a superb sliding tackle as Martial, wasn't it? Both of them. I just thought that worked really well. And it's just a massive shame that the penalty kind of just put this blot on the copybook when actually, and again, this is something else we'll come back to later, but I do feel that on the night, defensive-wise, Mourinho finally looked like he'd got it sussed on the whole. And I felt the clean sheet was actually beckoning. And so I'd like to see that partnership again. What it means for Toby Alderweireld, I don't know. Weird, kind of bearing in mind he's only just signed that new contract not too long ago, and was obviously a Mourinho favourite. Perhaps maybe against teams where you don't need that pace in the middle, perhaps that's when you'll maybe see a Dier and Alderweireld partnership. With Tongan, it's really unclear what's happening right now. I asked Mourinho about him on Thursday, and he said, look, he wants to stay to the remainder of the season. We want him to stay for the remainder of the season, because obviously his current contract ends on June the 30th. And then he said, and he's like, well, we're not even looking at further than that right now. Let's try and get this tied up. There's been some reports coming out of, I think it's Italy today, saying that Roma are trying to do a deal for him, which would mean that he doesn't play for the remainder of this season. Which then suddenly, if that were to be the case, him and Tanganga, suddenly the options become quite limited. And you do wonder whether someone like Foyth suddenly comes back into the fold, or maybe even Davies plays at centre-back if required. We'll see. But yeah, I like that pairing. I like the Dier and Sanchez pairing. I think it really complements each other. Just that older kind of experienced head guiding the younger guy. And, I saw quite a lot of captain material on Dier as well. Fullbacks, bit of a mixed bag. I thought, how do I put it? Neither of them, I thought, attacking-wise, were particularly up to much. I probably would say that maybe wasn't so much Davies' job. It never really is. I think he has, Son sat ahead of him a lot of the time, and he was meant to provide the width. I think Aurier, we know, does have that job of where it goes to a back three, and he's meant to stick out wide, and that meant Bergwijn could come inside. Aurier obviously did well, battled well to get the ball to Bergwijn for the goal, which was a superb goal. But, well, other than a bit of a ropey goalkeeping. But yeah, I just felt, in terms of who was more solid, I felt Davies was more solid. He dealt with Daniel James really well. I don't think much got past him down that side. Thought Aurier had one of those Aurier games where he did quite a few things right at the back, but then just had some moments where, it's like his brain just switched off for a second. He lost the ball. It's like 2 or 3 times. I think, pretty sure I'm right in saying that the amazing Lloris save from Martial was from him giving the ball away. I think he did that for the penalty that never was. I'm pretty sure that was Aurier giving the ball away as well. And it's just those moments that just kind of let him down. It's the concentration elements that just take away him being that next level right back for me. And why I just don't know whether, we'll see, whether Mourinho is actually confident he can get that player out of him. So that was the fullbacks for me. Midfield, I had mixed feelings on this. I think I disagreed slightly with some people on Harry Winks. I often get criticised for being too nice to Harry Winks because I do think he's a really, really good player. I just don't think he's quite found his permanent long-term role yet. I just felt there were times when he looked in control, and there were other times when sometimes the play was passing him by slightly and he was left chasing shadows. But then the same was with Sissoko. Sissoko had some really great moments and great interceptions, and there were other times when the two of them looked a little bit like they were chasing the game. I think with Sissoko, he hasn't played since New Year's Day, so that's totally understandable. Winks, I think, can play better. I got some criticism for that. I always get criticism for my player ratings. And to be honest, I never reply to criticism about player ratings because they're subjective. That's the whole point of it. As I think I tweeted this earlier, if you asked 1,000 people after a game who were inside a stadium or watching a match to give their player ratings, you probably wouldn't get two of them having the same ratings. That's how it is. So I don't get offended when people get all funny about that. But yeah, what I would say with Winks, he's been better for me. I wouldn't say he was awful, but I've seen better from him. I think he had a tough job in his hands, but yeah, I know how good he can be, and I don't think that was quite his top level. And then you've got the trident behind Kane, Lamela, Son, Bergwijn. Differing performances again for me. Lamela, I felt, did a lot of really good things. I think a lot of what Mourinho would have asked him to do, he carried out to the letter, frustrated United, got in their face. He upped the intensity of the rest of the team. He tackled, his interceptions. Like I say, they were constantly calling him back because he was the one that was essentially covering everyone. He was often getting out to the right to help Aurier as well. But what I would say with him is a lot of the good stuff went through him, certainly in Spurs half, but he was just having a bit of a nightmare of a night in the final third. His final balls were really not great, and that just unfortunately just knocked him down a little bit for me. It could have been a brilliant performance, but his quality with his final balls was really lacking. And that, and I think we'll come to in a minute, but I don't think that helped Kane. And it took a little while for Son and Bergwijn to warm up as well. Bergwijn obviously suddenly just burst to life with the goal. Brilliant surging run. Maguire didn't know what the hell to do with him. And obviously the shot was so powerful, De Gea just kind of shoveled it into his own goal. It wasn't great from him, but it was a really good goal. And that kind of woke up Son as well. Obviously we had that chance not too long after, and Bergwijn crossed it to the back post, and Son, great header, and De Gea pulled off a great save as well. But I think I would like to see him maybe on the other sides, or fluidly kind of fluctuating between the two teams, just constantly pulling the team apart. But I think what will happen is, hopefully, when they're absolutely firing, is whoever is absolutely pulling apart the team or dribbling down one side is going to leave space on the other for the other player. And I'd imagine if that's going to be the three he's going to go with up front, the Kane, Bergwijn, Son going forward, I still wonder from what you said afterwards whether Lucas is actually going to take one of those roles. But if those three, I think Son and Bergwijn are going to score a lot of goals purely because of that space created by the other one's efforts on the other side, exactly as you saw for Son's headed chance. So Son in the second half, both of them, to be fair, both of them in the second half looked like players that haven't played in months. Obviously both of them had their injuries pre-lockdown, and I felt that you saw that as they tired. Kane had a bit of a mare, let's be honest. You can't gloss over it. He didn't have great service. I think I'll definitely give him that in his corner. And we mustn't forget, like Sissoko, he has not played since New Year's Day. However, it was just his inability to get involved, and when he did what he did with the ball, he had less touches on the pitch. I think it was 36 in all than any other player on the pitch. And when he did get the ball, it was 60% possession. 60% success rate with his passing, which is not great. Yes, he was used at that battering ram that I really hope he isn't for the future. There were a lot of pointless aerial duels with Harry Maguire. So, whether they count some of those, I don't know, as misplaced passes. I hope not, because that would be incredibly harsh. But there were too many times in the second half he was just coming so deep. I mean, here's a little stat for you. He never touched the ball in the Man United area in the entire game. And, I think that says it all. Kane does have this thing. It does take him a while to get into matches after he's been injured. We know that. We've seen it on countless occasions. You could argue he's like that at the start of seasons. Other than, I think was it last year he broke his hoodoo, the haven't scored in August hoodoo, but that was a thing. And I think part of that was because he takes his time to warm up. And I do wonder whether, although it frustrated people, keeping him on for the 90 minutes could actually serve him well, just purely just getting that muscle memory in his legs and his movement for future games. So, yeah, let's talk about the subs, because that's a bone of contention as well. Mourinho made a big thing on Thursday about how you're able to, the ability to now use 5 subs was something brought through by powerful clubs, in his words, forced through because they want that, because they've got big squads. You could argue, looking at Man U's bench, I did feel before the match like, crikey, look at the players that they can bring on. And they did, they had Pogba, Matic, Mata, young Greenwood was on there, Lingard, someone else who's completely... Igalo as well. They had so many options. Mourinho made a big thing as well about how he didn't have attacking options to bring off the bench. He didn't have any strikers or attacking midfielders. I mean, I have an issue with that. My issue would be that, again, it comes back to Tanguy Ndombele. There was no reason why you had to... I mean, he said himself, Mourinho, 70 minutes we were great, final 20 minutes we had a lot of tired legs. So why not bring on Ndombele? Why not bring him on just to hold that ball, to give those players a little bit more kind of a recharge time, and he can go through plays. Even if you're going to play him in, say, the Lamela role, play him in that attacking role. One of the friendlies, the in-house friendly, it looked like Ndombele was playing it. He scored a lovely goal. So why not play him up there, just so when the ball comes to his feet, he can do what he does, just keep it, use it well, and get on with the game. If you're worried he's not going to track back and you'll lose the defensive discipline, that's why leave him up there. Use him as an attacking player. And I do think the other thing that kind of confidence-wise wouldn't have been great for was Ryan Sessegnon. Ryan Sessegnon, Jose Mourinho's made it very clear that this guy, 20-year-old Ryan Sessegnon, is not ready to be a left-back yet. Although he sees similar traits to Ashley Cole, he says he's not there yet. So by that logic, Mourinho sees him as a left winger. So he did have an attacking midfielder on his bench, one with pace and one who also can double back as like a wing back and help Davies on the left. So for me, it just wasn't an excuse that washed with me at all. And also, if you're really going to be pedantic about it, why play all of your attacking players and stick them in the team in the first place and then complain that you didn't have anyone? We obviously, he was quite right and fair to criticise or moan before lockdown that, I haven't got the likes of Bergwijn, Kane, Son, players like that. But then if you're just going to moan afterwards about not having Lucas and Dele on your bench, when you used every other single attacking player in your first starting 11, that's your plan. There was no reason, like I just said, you could have had Lamela on the bench and played Ndombele in that role. You could have used Ndombele in the centre of midfield and had one less up front and had a midfield three. There was ways around that, and to me it felt, and I wrote an article about this, you can see it, I think there was a few reasons behind this two subs thing. To only bring on Celso and then Jedson late on. It was essentially, for me, it was making a point or trying to make a point to the big powerful clubs. Look, have all the subs you want, I can still beat you. Didn't work, obviously. It could be a point towards Daniel Levy. It could be saying, look, I don't have the squad, the balanced extra squad I need. You need to help me with that in the upcoming window. We'll come on to transfers a little bit towards the end of this. Just for me, I don't like the aspect of trying to make a point by being stubborn. I don't think it serves Spurs well. And I don't understand it. That just, for me, was a bit of a strange one. And I think hopefully we've got the press conference tomorrow. I'm going to try and, if I can, because we're quite limited now, and there's so many people log on to these virtual press conferences, you don't actually have a lot of time to ask a question. You maybe get one or two. So I've got to choose them wisely. But I would be interested to know exactly why the two subs, that was all he made, and whether it purely just was because what he said after the match about the not having the options, because I think there's more to it than that. So that was the game in itself. Like I say, the penalty was a bit of a soft one. Bruno Fernandes was decent on the night. I still don't think Man U are the all-conquering force. I think that top 5 battle is there to be had. Top 4, we'll see what happens with that. I still wonder whether that's too far gone. But if City lose their appeal, and there's a lot of talk that they may not be able to overturn certainly next season's ban, then it comes down to that 5th place. And I think Spurs, as I said, I think that defence is sorting itself out. I think he's worked out how he wants them to play, and he's drilled them over the recent weeks. I can see clean sheets. I can see it. The big problem, obviously, has been going forward for Spurs in the last few games anyway. And I feel we've got all these players back, and I think they're going to hit their rhythm. It's kind of, for me, although it wasn't, there weren't a lot of chances made, and Mourinho made it very clear the West Ham game will be different, and this was very much just the way he set up for United. But what I would say is, it kind of feels to me like one of those where, I hate the expression, it's a little bit cliched, but someone's going to get a spanking, as it were. There will be a team that everything will suddenly click. Kane will get back to scoring his goals. Son and Bergwijn will absolutely fly it. Maybe Dele Alli coming back in, but it will happen. You know, obviously, I'm sure Spurs fans will be hoping it's West Ham, and it happens then. But if they can find that next gear again, you know, it's kind of a lot of it's in their hand. We've seen Sheffield United having a tough day today, and Spurs have got them, you know, in whatever it is, 10, 11 days' time, after 9 days after West Ham. And if they can beat West Ham and they can go to United and do a job, that Sheffield United, and do a job there, then suddenly I think that top 5 becomes a real possibility. Because I think United have got a couple of tough games, and I don't think they're, like I say, I think there's a way of getting at them. And I think, like Mourinho said, that weakness of maybe not being able to force the issue yourself is going to cause problems when they are playing against teams that will sit and look to counter them. And there's a few of those they've got. So I wouldn't say that's over. I still think that's a battle to come. But even if, you know, obviously they'd love Champions League, but even if the next 8 games set up Tottenham for next season and give Mourinho an idea of what he wants to do, then that's kind of a success in itself as well. So we've got a press conference tomorrow. Press conferences after the match were a bit mad. Essentially, if you weren't aware, we have to stay in our seats in the stadium and ask Mourinho questions via Zoom while he sits in the press conference room downstairs. It's weird, but I understand it. But it certainly was strange, and Solskjaer's one was a mare. He couldn't hear the questions. When he did answer, there was all feedback and echoes. Mourinho's was really good. It worked well, but the issue with it was it came 5 minutes before the entire stadium has to be evacuated, essentially. An hour after a match, the entire stadium has to be empty as part of Premier League protocol. So, yeah, it caused a bit of mayhem for us in the press. So, West Ham now, though. Obviously, they had a tough time against Wolves. We know the old cliche, it's their cup final. When they play Spurs, they always raise their game. You know, Spurs are not going to have that crowd behind them, but what I would say, they had 60,000 in the stadium last season, and West Ham still, obviously rather annoyingly, became the first team to beat Spurs at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So, probably the fans, maybe when it comes to West Ham, don't seem to make as much of an impact. I think same way the other way around as well. Obviously, Spurs won at West Ham, didn't they? So it'd be interesting to see how that works out. We're waiting to hear, you know, obviously whether Lucas is ready or not. We still have to wait and hear about the Dier decision. I asked him about Dier the other day, and he was like, kind of this little performance he put on. He was like, Mourinho was like, I'm shocked. Like, really? That's still a thing? I completely forgot about that. It's like, yeah, it is still happening. We're still waiting to find the verdict on that. And like I say, with that Dier playing so well at the back, I think that'll be a proper blow, especially if they lose Vertonghen. If he does go and Tanganga can't come back soon, that's really going to make their central defensive problems really glaring, quite frankly. I really hope he doesn't get banned. It would be a bit mad, but there's a part of me that feels that they might just give him maybe a small ban just to discourage others from jumping into the crowd. I mean, Mourinho said, you know, everyone thinks he did the right thing. There was no physical contact and things like that. I get that. I just got to worry that the FA might try and make an example of him, which would be really bad. He will make changes, I think we'll see different players come in. I wouldn't be surprised if Lucas, Dele, Celso, possibly Ndombele all come into the team. He really likes Jedson and Skip, so I don't think you'd want to change that many. I think one point of him, actually, the other reason for him maybe using 2 subs was 9 players got 90 minutes under their belt. And what that helps with is there's been quite a few teams, especially in the Bundesliga as well, you're seeing more and more players are struggling to get into their full rhythm. And that may be the case that they're not playing. They're playing 50, 60, I think, 60 minutes the first one. So a lot of them are playing hour football rather than 90-minute football. And that influences tactics and changes. You know, if you're finishing the match with almost half of a different team on the pitch, then that does influence certain aspects of principles of play you want to do. So I do wonder whether part of Mourinho's thinking on that is if I can give 9 players 90 minutes fitness, then as these games go on, we'll have fitter players. Maybe not so the ones that might have to come in case of injury, but this core of the team will actually be able to last matches and be stronger later on. Whether it works or not is another thing. Just before I wanted to go, just before I'm going, I wanted to touch very quickly on transfers because Mourinho admitted very clearly at the end of Thursday's press conference in the written section we had that there will be transfers. Tottenham will do transfers. He said they're not going to be, you look at Timo Werner going to Chelsea. He said we're not talking like that. He said most clubs are not going to be in that situation to do that. As I keep saying, Spurs have estimated £200 million losses for this financial year due to everything that's happened with the football shutdown and all the things that can't happen at the stadium, events, NFL games, everything like that. So there's not going to be the money to do that. But I thought this was quite heartening to hear him say there will be transfers. There will be. He said it's just clever buying, certainly in a couple of areas. And, like I've said before, this will be, Spurs will look at those players in the last year of their deal and try to get the best possible deals for them, or free agents. You got Milik at Napoli is one that I've heard they're looking quite closely at, a big striker. Who else? We've got Højbjerg, obviously, at Southampton is another one as well that they're looking quite closely at. Both of them in the final year of their deal. Nathan Ferguson, the West Brom fullback who can also play in central defence. He's available for free in the summer. I presume, I think it'll be one of those where there's a tribunal fee, but it won't be much. And, he was all set to go to Palace and had a knee problem, but I think Spurs are kind of just floating about in the background on that one, just waiting to see. I wouldn't be shocked if they come in for him because, they do need another right back, especially if Kyle Walker-Peters moves on. If that doesn't happen, then you've got Max Aarons, obviously, at Norwich as well. He's not in his last year of his deal, but with him, if Norwich, which, is a possibility, probably a higher possibility because they're bottom of the league and a little bit adrift, if they go down, how much, Spurs can get him for might be a different thing. I think it was a Norwich fan told me that Norwich have very much planned for the possibility of relegation with their spending hasn't been great. They didn't spend very much at all when they came up. So in terms of whether they need loads of money coming in is another thing. But I do wonder with what's happened this year, whether that changes, especially with relegation on top of that. And, then you've got free transfers like Ryan Fraser. For me, the homegrown element makes sense because Spurs are lacking in the homegrown side of things. But for me, I just don't know whether he's the kind of player Spurs need. Willian maybe makes slightly more sense because of the Mourinho connection, and he's a winner. He's got that experience that can be passed on around other members of the team. But I mean, these are the kind of transfers we're looking at: freeze or 1 year kind of players with 1 year left on their deal, or players maybe from relegated teams. It's, as I've said before, and I've said a lot of times, it's not sexy transfers. We're not talking about Werner, Ziyech, Havertz, like these ridiculous sums of money. But what I would say about Chelsea, other than the fact that they've got a billionaire owner who does put lots of money into the club, I looked at their finances the other day when I was doing a story about Spurs, and I think there's something like 1.2 billion pounds that they owe in a private loan. We know that private loan is from Abramovich from over the years. He puts money into that club. And they also had the Hazard money. It's about 100 million from him, which they didn't really spend. Diego Costa was around 50 million they got from him from Atletico Madrid as well. They've had that money that, other than Pulisic, hasn't really been spent. So that's kind of what they're doing now. And fair play to them. They'll be taking advantage of other teams' financial struggles. You'd imagine Chelsea will be a proper force next season. And obviously then you've got the likes of City. Liverpool have already, Klopp said that they can't really spend. United will probably find money from somewhere. City we know. But obviously they may lose players with the lack of Champions League football if that's the thing. But with Spurs and Mourinho, they made it very clear it's going to be about clever transfers. And I've said this in previous ones, so I won't go on. But Spurs just need some clever tweaks, some experienced players, some winners, some leaders. And I think, put them around all the very talented young players in that team. And I think Mourinho then has a squad that he can probably do things with. But it'll be really interesting to see the style of play. That's a crucial thing for me. I know, essentially, at the end of the day, we just want trophies at Tottenham. We want wins. But it would be nice if you could have that and good football. And he has done that at other clubs. This narrative that he only plays boring defensive anti-football isn't true. It's happened at certain times with certain clubs, but it's not, the entire way his career has been. So let's see what happens against West Ham. As I say, we've got the press conference tomorrow, so I'll find out more. And let's hope for another or a win. I suppose I haven't won in a while. Let's not forget that. So just to get back to winning ways. So hope you got something out of that. And happy Father's Day to any dads out there, and also the mums. Single mums that also have to do a father's role if the dad's not around. So hope you've had a good day in that. And stay safe, stay healthy, and I shall catch you later, probably later in the week after the West Ham game, and we'll have another chat. Catch you later.